The committee will come to order. Today we're considering the nominations of Robert Shriver III to be the Deputy Director of the Office of Personnel Management and Richard Revez to be the Administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at the Office of Management and Budget. Certainly welcome to both of you and to your family members who are seated behind you. We welcome all of you today. Thank you for joining us. I also want to congratulate each of you on your nominations and thank you for your willingness to take on these very important roles in the federal government. Both of the positions we're considering nominations for are going to require independent, nonpartisan leadership to serve in the best interest of the American public. The Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, develops and administers human capital policies for the federal workforce and functions as the bedrock of our nation's personnel and management efforts across the executive branch, while the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, also known as OIRA, serves as the central authority for the review and coordination of federal regulations. Mr. Shriver, if confirmed, you will be OPM's Deputy Director charged with setting the policies for more than 1.8 million dedicated public servants, which will require agency leadership that can build confidence in OPM and maintain a nonpartisan, merit-based workforce that serves every American. The Deputy Chief Human Resources Officer is a significant undertaking, and I believe your extensive experience in public service, including current and prior experience at OPM, will help you provide an innovative vision for the future of the federal workforce. Likewise, OIRA Administrator is an incredibly important position. Mr. Revez, if confirmed, you will lead 6 subject matter branches and be responsible for ensuring the office provides transparency into regulatory decisions and promotes public participation in the rulemaking process. Your long history of both academic and legal analysis on the modernization of the regulatory process, improving cost-benefit analysis, and ensuring greater transparency and participation in the rulemaking process will certainly serve the office well. While OIRA is a small, relatively unknown office in the federal government, it actually manages federal rules and regulations that impact Americans' daily lives in a number of different ways. The decisions that your agency will make can affect everything from repairing roads and bridges, funding K-12 schools, and protecting air and drinking water. People in Michigan and across the country depend on OIRA to work with federal agencies to efficiently and effectively implement important safeguards that will protect the health and safety of all Americans. And while few folks outside of Washington are familiar with OIRA, they know all too well how delayed regulatory impacts can affect their lives. For too long, essential safeguards for lead in drinking water and PFAS substances, toxic chemicals that are widely used in industry and consumer products, remain stalled in the regulatory review process. Despite federal agencies promising to take a more proactive approach to address this crisis, Michiganders in communities like Flint, Oscoda, and Parchment in my home state cannot drink the water from their own faucets without fearing the ingestion of toxins from lead as well as PFAS. And while regulations are the responsibility of federal agencies, they must be reviewed before they can be adopted. And that's why, as chairman of the Senate's top oversight committee, I know it is critical that lawmakers pursue regulatory reforms that reduce duplicative or burdensome processes while maintaining important protections for health, safety, and economic security. And I look forward to working with OIRA to make progress on these important reforms. In short, if confirmed, both of you will have a dramatic impact on families, businesses, and communities in Michigan as well as across the country. I'm pleased that President Biden has nominated 2 distinguished and highly qualified nominees to serve in these incredibly important positions. Today, I look forward to hearing from both of you about your experience and qualifications and how you plan to serve. Thank you. Senator Langford, you're now recognized for your opening comments.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Hearts and prayers today go out to the folks in Florida. They've had a very, very difficult past 24 hours, to say the least, and they'll have a long recovery process on that. And so I wanted to remind folks, as we're going through important business today, that our hearts are all still in Florida as well. I do want to thank the chairman for actually holding this hearing today. I'm filling in as ranking member today on this to be able to work on two incredibly important nominees of areas that my subcommittee is very, very involved in. That is the issue of regulatory affairs and federal workforce policy. Rob Shriver the third, because I just met the second as well, is nominated to be the Deputy Director of OPM. He's a professional with 25 years' experience working on the issues related to federal employees. We've had the opportunity to be able to talk at length already before this hearing on several of the federal workforce hiring issues and some of the challenges. There are significant challenges on the federal workforce. Over the past decade, OPM has had to navigate many changes in leadership, structural overhauls, a major cybersecurity event, while attempting to achieve its mission to lead executive branch federal workforce policy and administer the benefits programs for the federal family, as well as handling retirement issues. OPM continues to have many challenges it needs to address. For instance, it takes 100 days on average for the federal agencies to be able to hire a new employee, 100 days. Everyone for now a very long time has said that's got to come down, and there have been benefits in the ones and twos of days, but not in the significant time period it really takes to be able to handle that. Another is on the other end of not just the hiring, it's actually on the retirement process. OPM manages a paper-based retirement system out of a cave in Pennsylvania. This has got to be resolved for our federal retirees as well. If we're going to have a modern, effective federal workforce, OPM has to be a modern, effective agency as well in leading that. Look forward to that conversation today. Dr. Ricky Revez has a long academic career with an extensive list of publications, including many books, academic articles, op-eds. The administrator of OIRA, as I mentioned to him in our extensive conversation as well prior to this meeting, is the most important job in Washington that no one's ever heard of. That task at OIRA sets the parameters for how we're going to do regulations in every single agency. I've long been concerned, quite frankly, that this administration has been so slow to be able to nominate someone to OIRA, and my concern has been they've not been serious about the regulatory issues. I hope I'm wrong about that. But because the regulatory policy affects everyone. Fair, predictable regulatory policy allows businesses, particularly small businesses, to be open, to plan for the future, to thrive. It absolutely affects everything in our economy and our safety of how we handle our way of life. Drastic swings in policy from administration to administration creates uncertainty. We need safe food. We need safe working conditions. Regulatory policy has to be known, predictable, and it has to follow the rules that have been passed down by Congress. OIRA is the gatekeeper that ensures the executive branch follows the law, completes cost-benefit analysis, doesn't cut corners for convenience. The job of the OIRA administrator is to often tell your boss and agency heads, no, that's not the way the law is actually written. We have to be able to follow the law. It's very similar to the role of the general counsel in each of our agencies to be able to have that moment of advice to say, this is the right way to do it. If you want to be able to do it, let's follow the law, and it protects the taxpayers from years of litigation in the days ahead. Professor, there'll be many in the administration that are going to press, because every administration does. Republican and Democrat, they press on OIRA to be able to go faster, to do different. You'll have the unique role of being able to look at folks and to say, let's follow the law. And that's a good spot to be able to be. In closing, I look around this dais and I see relatively few people that are engaged. That does two things to me. One of them, it tells most folks that they've looked at your resume, they've looked at your background, and see that it's consistent, and so there's not a big press. It also reminds me of the last time an OIRA nominee was in front of this committee. They actually sat by themselves, and that was Paul Ray, and they went through hours of blistering questions and went through page after page of questions for the record afterwards, harassing him. So this is a different type of conversation that's actually happening today, and it's good to be able to see my Republican nominee colleagues treating everyone fairly, because we have had individuals that have not been treated fairly in the past administration in this exact same role in this. So glad to be able to see a good, fair dialogue, to be able to go through very difficult issues today. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Senator Langford. It is the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses, so if each of you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Our first nominee is Robert Harley Shriver III to be Deputy Director of the Office of Personnel Management. Mr. Shriver is the Associate Director for Employee Services at OPM, where he leads OPM's government-wide workforce policy team. His expertise includes recruiting and hiring, pay and leave, strategic workforce planning, labor and employee relations, performance management, the senior executive service, work-life balance, and the future of work. Previously, he served at OPM during the Obama administration as the Deputy General Counsel for Policy, leading the development and implementation of a number of government-wide initiatives. He has also served as OPM's Assistant Director for National Healthcare Operations, where he led the implementation of the multi-state plan program under the Affordable Care Act. Mr. Shriver, welcome to the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Langford, and distinguished members of the committee for welcoming me here today. It is an honor to be considered by this committee as President Biden's nominee for Deputy Director of the Office of Personnel Management. I'd like to start by recognizing the hardworking employees of the federal government, and in particular those at OPM. I would not be here today without their dedication and commitment to their mission. I care deeply about the civil service, about OPM, and about all federal employees, and I thank them for their service. I am also fortunate to have several family members with me here today. My wife, Joanne Martinez, is here with two of our three children, Mitch and Justine. Our oldest son, Robbie, is away for his first year of college, so he couldn't be here today. I want to thank my kids for all the joy they bring me, as well as the support and patience they have shown throughout my career. I especially want to thank Joanne for her partnership, as both of us have balanced demanding careers with raising our family, and for her kindness and strength throughout our 22 years of marriage. I am blessed to have my father, Robert H. Shriver Jr., my mother, Norma, and my sister, Melinda, here with me today. My parents are retired school teachers, and my sister is a public school administrator. They've traveled from Nazareth, Pennsylvania to support me today, as they have done consistently and steadfastly throughout my life. I was raised in a middle-class family in the working-class town of Nazareth, Pennsylvania. I was fortunate to be able to go to college, but I needed to work to contribute to the costs. So during high school, I worked in the paint department of a Kmart near my house. When I went off to college at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, I washed dishes and served food in the dining hall. And then when I went to George Washington University Law School here in Washington, D.C., I got a job at a law firm, not as a summer associate, but as a file clerk. The idea of an unpaid internship did not even occur to me. I needed a paycheck, and working in that file room got me that. I have carried those lessons on the importance of hard work into my professional career. I've had the good fortune to work in several positions at OPM, including my current position as the Associate Director of Employee Services, where I lead OPM's government-wide workforce policy team. I've also worked in state government, for a labor union, and in the private sector. I've held jobs that focused on law, policy, operations, and information technology. I've represented both labor and management. I've been a purchaser and a seller of services for the government. I've been a stakeholder and led stakeholder engagement. I've had tremendous mentors who taught me how important it is to help the next generation of employees, something that drives me every day. Through it all, I've been driven by one overarching principle: to help make the government work better for the American people. OPM is a critical agency for effective and efficient government operations. I like to say that everybody is in OPM's business because OPM is in everybody's business. And what I mean is that strategic workforce management is critical to every agency in government, and OPM exists to provide expert guidance, advice, and support on the full range of workforce matters. OPM also exists to preserve and protect the nonpartisan career civil service. Day in and day out, we balance these two foundational principles. How can we advance innovation in strategic human capital management while honoring the bedrock principles of our merit system that dates to the Pendleton Act of 1883? If confirmed as Deputy Director, I will strive to build on the successes OPM has had over the past 20 months. I will leverage the experience I've had working in 3 different offices to drive policy innovation and customer service improvements across the agency. In partnership with Director Ahuja, I will apply the work ethic ingrained in me by my parents and community from an early age toward advancing my overarching leadership principle: help make the government work better for the American people. I want to thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and all the members of the committee and their staffs for taking the time to meet with me both today and beforehand. If I am fortunate enough to be confirmed, I look forward to continuing our conversations and with Director Ahuja, strengthening the relationship between OPM and this committee. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Shriver. Our second nominee is Richard Revez to be Administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at the Office of Management and Budget. Mr. Revez is an Ace Prize Professor of Law and Dean Emeritus at the New York University School of Law and one of the nation's leading voices in the fields of both environmental and regulatory law and policy. In addition to his work at NYU, he founded the Institute for Policy Integrity, a think tank and advocacy organization that promotes policies for the environment, for public health, and consumers. He has also served as the director of the American Law Institute, a leading independent organization in the United States that produces scholarly work to clarify, to modernize, and improve the law. He has also published 10 books and more than 80 articles in major law reviews and journals advocating for protective environmental policies. Mr. Revez, welcome to the committee. You may proceed with your opening remarks.
Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Lankford, and members of the committee, it's a privilege to come before you as President Biden's nominee to be the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. I would like to thank all the members of the committee for considering my nomination, the members who took the time to speak with me before this hearing, and the staff for their help and guidance throughout this process. And I'm enormously grateful to the President for the trust reflected by this nomination. I am deeply honored and humbled. As I was growing up in Argentina during the very turbulent 1960s and 1970s, when democratic rule was routinely interrupted by coups and deadly political violence, I could have never imagined that I would be sitting in this chair one day. I grew up speaking Spanish and learned English as a second language. I came to the United States to go to college in 1975 when I was 17. I arrived 2 weeks before the beginning of my freshman year at Princeton, as Argentina was entering a 6-year period during which between 10,000 and 30,000 people were killed through government-led violence in a country with a tenth the population of the United States. I am so grateful for the academic excellence that the United States offered me and for the safe haven it provided me during this time of turbulence. The United States has given me extraordinary opportunities. I became a U.S. citizen in 1982 when I was a second-year law student. Only 2.5 years later, I came to Washington, D.C. to serve as a law clerk to Justice Thurgood Marshall, which was an honor of a lifetime. I'm enormously proud of my family members and deeply grateful for their extraordinary support. My wife, Vicki Bean, to whom I've been married for 33 years, is my colleague on the NYU Law School faculty. For 6 of the last 8 years, she served in New York City government, first as commissioner of the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and then as deputy mayor for housing and economic development. My son, Joshua Revez, is a lawyer in the civil division at the U.S. Department of Justice. My daughter, Mira Revez, could not be here because she's a high school English teacher in Massachusetts and has a full day of classes today. And my daughter-in-law, Hillary Ledwell, recently left the Department of Homeland Security to serve as a judicial law clerk. I very much admire the commitment to public service that each of them displays in their endeavors and hope to emulate it if I am confirmed. I'm sad that my parents are both deceased and could not accompany me today. My father, Nicholas Revez, was displaced by the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, and at a relatively young age had to cope with the murder of both his parents and 5 of his 7 sisters at Auschwitz. He died when I was only 80 years old. My mother, Nora Revez, was also displaced by World War II and its aftermath. After a roundabout journey, she became a U.S. citizen and got to see the unfolding of a significant portion of my legal career. During my 37 years as a law professor, I have worked extensively on areas related to government regulation. The bulk of my work has been on environmental, health, and safety regulation, but I have dealt with other regulatory areas as well. I have also focused on the structure of the executive branch and on the role of OIRA as a coordinator of executive branch activities. In addition to my academic work, I have learned a great deal about how the federal government functions through my service as a public member and senior fellow of the Administrative Conference of the United States, and on committees of the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Science Foundation, and the National Research Council. Over the last 2 decades, I have been entrusted with several leadership positions, including my service as Dean of NYU Law School from 2002 to 2013, and since 2014 as Director of the American Law Institute. In those positions, I have an open-door, collaborative management style. I'm accessible to my staff and responsive to their concerns. I believe in hearing a full range of perspectives before making a decision. I lead by example and not by command. I would bring the same management style to my position leading OIRA. If confirmed, I'll be honored to work with the President and Congress to ensure that our nation's regulatory policies serve the interests of the American people. Thank you again for considering my nomination. I will be delighted to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Revez. There are 3 questions that the committee asks of every nominee, so I'm going to ask each of you to respond briefly just with a yes or no. And we'll start with you, Mr. Shriver, and then Mr. Revez. First, is there anything you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you have been nominated?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Second, do you know of anything personal or otherwise that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you have been nominated?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No, Mr. Chairman.
And lastly, do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Well, thank you. Mr. Revez, on his first day in office, President Biden issued a memorandum entitled Modernizing Regulatory Review, directing the production of recommendations to improve and to modernize the regulatory review process. My question for you is, if confirmed, what will be the first concrete steps that you will take to finalize the actions required in this memorandum? And what do you believe are the most important reforms that should be made at OMB Circular A4 to help modernize the regulatory review process in the federal government?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a strong believer in evidence-based decision-making. Circular A4, which provides guidance to agencies on how to conduct their cost-benefit analyses, is a very important document, but is now almost 20 years old. As the President called for in his memorandum on modernizing regulatory review, Circular A4 should be updated to account for advances in scientific and economic understanding in how the costs and benefits of regulation affect the American people and are distributed across populations. If confirmed, my first step will be to receive an update from staff on the progress that has been made thus far and see what needs to be done to move forward with the President's command.
Thank you, Mr. Revez. Mr. Shriver, federal retirees have been reaching out to my office a great deal to express an incredible amount of frustration with the length of time that it takes the OPM to process their retirement claims. As Deputy Director, if confirmed as Deputy Director, how are you going to work to reduce these retirement claim delays, including modernizing OPM's legacy retirement systems? And that means transitioning from a paper-based system and Excel sheet calculators to really an updated platform and updated tools that can expedite this process. If you could give us your views on that and how you plan to tackle that challenge, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And let me just start by saying that we do need to do better by our federal retirees. These are folks who commit their careers to federal service, and when it comes time to retire, they need to be getting top-notch customer service. I know, though I don't oversee retirement services in my current role as the Associate Director of Employee Services, I do know that the team works hard day in and day out to serve those retirees. I think you're right in that the systems do need some modernization. I know there have been past efforts over many years and across many administrations to modernize the retirement system. So obviously there are some challenges there that I look forward to being briefed on. I would, if I were lucky enough to be confirmed, I would be excited to bring to bear my experience in operations and customer service that I gained in the healthcare space. And certainly, as Deputy Director, I would prioritize improving customer service for our retirees.
So given your experience in customer service and the work that you did prior, give me some sense of how you believe we can improve the customer experience for federal employees and retirees both, current employees as well, that rely on the OPM for their benefits and services?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And certainly OPM is rebuilding capacity. As Ranking Member Langford laid out in his opening statement, the OPM has been through turbulent several years, and so we are certainly rebuilding the capacity of the agency and looking at our customer service capabilities. I think one of the things that I can say just from my experience in my current role is it's really important to build good relationships with the agencies, not only with the chief human capital officers, but with other parts of the agencies that maybe work in certain policy areas or work on benefits, for example. A lot of the challenges that happen with respect to retirement processing have to do with the way that information it transfers between agencies and OPM. In particular, if somebody has worked in multiple agencies or under multiple retirement systems. But with respect to customer service writ large, agencies rely on OPM in any number of ways to have approvals for expedited hiring authority when there's a critical hiring need or special pay authority. And we've been working really hard to build those relationships with agencies and be proactive and help them problem solve so that OPM can reestablish itself as the strategic human capital leader for the federal government.
Right. Mr. Revez, we held a hearing earlier this year in the committee on the need to improve the customer experience for citizens as they interact with government. And we heard how the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Privacy Act can create some significant hurdles to delivering high-quality citizen services to the American people. In addition, this committee recently passed the Disaster Assistance Simplification Act, which basically exempts large portions of the PRA and the Privacy Act to ensure that disaster survivors can easily and quickly receive benefits they deserve. Likely a lot of folks in Florida are going to be interacting with this system after the hurricane just swept through, as an example. And folks, often in a very difficult time in their life, have to wade through a variety of paperwork and different paperwork for different agencies to try to get help that they desperately need. So my question for you is, do you agree that the PRA and Privacy Act could be updated to take advantage of modern customer experience, information technology, and data sharing developments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The PRA has important goals. It seeks to ensure that government information requests generate useful information and not impose excessive burdens on the American people. Information should also be collected in ways that make it useful across the federal government, for example, by using consistent protocols. The PRA dates back to 1995. It is now more than 25 years old, and amendments might well be appropriate. If confirmed, I look forward to working with members of this committee and their staffs, and learning more about what experience of stakeholders under the PRA has been during the period since the statute's passage. But I do agree that figuring out how best to respond to the needs of the American people through the PRA is an extremely important goal.
Well, I appreciate that. There's a lot of work to do in that area, and breaking through some of the bureaucratic hurdles I would hope would be a priority for you if you're confirmed. Will it be a priority?
It will be a priority, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you. Ranking Member Portman, recognized for your questions.
I'll be the Portman fill-in today on that one, so yeah. So, you did, actually. So there's a little
Force of habit.
there's a little muscle memory going on right
It
there
is
as well. So,
exactly
yeah.
right. Ranking Member Langford.
Y'all, thanks for being here. Thanks again. Thanks to your families as well coming in. It's a long day to be able to be here and through all the dialogue and conversation, and it's a long process to be able to go through. Both these roles are nonpartisan roles. Now, there's no question each of us have partisan preferences on this, but the important thing for OPM and for our IRA is we have, as Congress, the confidence that we're just following the law and try to be able to help individuals in the federal workforce to be able to both get hired, good oversight and management, good retirement process on this. So again, these shouldn't be partisan type roles and tasks in that. So I would tell you, as we've spoken personally on this, I would count on nonpartisan activity happening in the Office of Personnel Management and the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs. Saying all that, I do want to walk through a couple of things. Mr. Revez, we talked yesterday briefly about this, that I've had individuals that work in companies that they are new in a company, and they start with the process and they start to be able to look at the issues that are related to their company and guidance documents that are available from federal agencies, and they start searching and they find quickly they have to be an expert in the federal government to just find out what guidance documents relate to their business. Right now, reginfo.gov exists. Is there any barrier for our OIRA actually putting in all of the guidance documents for anyone who's trying to be able to search guidance documents into reginfo.gov, and so that a new person or an experienced person that's trying to be able to pull up just what guidance is out there for my company can go find that? Because currently that doesn't exist at this point for one central clearinghouse for guidance documents.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm a strong believer that transparency needs to be a key requirement for a well-functioning regulatory process. And guidance documents play a very important role in that process, and it's therefore important that guidance be made available to the public and be made available in a user-friendly way. As you noted, it's not enough that it exists somewhere, but it's important that people be able to access that information efficiently. I'm a longtime public member and senior fellow of the Administrative Conference of the United States, which in 2019 endorsed a policy on the public electronic availability of guidance documents. And I understand that having guidance documents be available on the websites of individual agencies might not be as useful as having them available all in one central repository. And if confirmed, I look forward to learning from my colleagues at OIRA and elsewhere in the federal government what the experience has been in working with you and other members of the committee to see what can be done to make guidance documents as accessible to regulated entities and to the American people generally as possible. And if a central repository is the best way to go, I look forward to learning how best to accomplish that.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate that, because you have to be an expert in which agency handles which issue to be able to find guidance documents. And I would tell you, as a member of the Senate, I still have to hesitate and say, wait, is that that has that? Is that Interior that has that? Or is that EPA that has that? And if I have to struggle to be able to figure out which one that is at times, certainly people that don't deal with this every single day go through that same process. You and I had a very good conversation yesterday about cost-benefit analysis. For whatever reason, this has become controversial to be able to discuss just the most basic thing in cost-benefit. This goes back decades. This goes back to Executive Order 12866. This should not be a controversial thing just to be able to look at the cost and the benefit of any regulation at this point. But I want to go past that to be able to say, how do you handle cost-benefit analysis, and how will you actually implement that on things like equal amounts You can't have the cost be 5 years and the benefit be 100 years. You can't have the cost be American, but the benefit be global. It has to be equal in its analysis so that you really get a good feel of what that cost benefit really is. And sometimes that also means getting other models that disagree in trying to be able to get the best possible data. How will you handle that as a leader of OIRA?
Thank you, Senator Langford. I'm a strong supporter of the use of cost-benefit analysis in evaluating regulations. A great deal of my academic work has been about that and has been supportive of the use of cost-benefit analysis. Executive Orders 12866 and 13563, which President Biden reaffirmed, make clear that the benefits of regulation must justify the costs and that regulation should maximize net benefits, except where precluded by statute. President Biden reaffirmed these executive orders in his memorandum on modernizing regulatory review. And I support cost-benefit analysis so strongly because it is critically important that regulations deliver value for the American people. On the specifics of your question, I don't see cost-benefit analysis as a Democratic or Republican discipline. There's one right way to do it, and it's a way that, for the federal government, comports with OMB Circular A4, which provides guidance to agencies, and with well-accepted professional norms of the economics community. In terms of timelines, the timelines for the evaluation of costs and benefits should be chosen to capture all of the effects, whether positive or negative. It would be wrong to have a long timeline for benefits and to truncate costs, and it would be wrong to have a long timeline for costs and to truncate benefits. Similarly, for this to be a valuable analytical tool, it has to be carried out in an even-handed way. That's what I promoted in my scholarship, and that's what I would do if I were lucky enough to be confirmed to this position.
Okay. The Supreme Court has recently made a decision in the West Virginia case dealing with the major questions doctrine. It is an analysis that in some ways is subjective and in some ways pretty clear. It is like the famous statement from the Supreme Court, I know pornography when I see it. The major questions doctrine is Congress is not trying to hide an elephant in a mouse hole. So the basic question of this is every agency is going to come and say, I think I have the ability to be able to do this, and OIRA becomes the place to be able to say what on the major questions doctrine, because this will become an issue of litigation and the taxpayer significantly in years of confusion if there's not a basic push-pull that happens with the General Counsel and also with the leadership of OIRA. How will you handle the major questions doctrine?
Thank you, Senator. A very important role of OIRA review involves making sure that the regulations are legal. Legality review is contemplated in Executive Order 12866, and that's something OIRA does alongside its review of the costs and benefits and so on. West Virginia v. EPA is the law of the land. The Supreme Court decided that case. And clearly, agencies need to think about whether regulations that have vast economic and political significance have been explicitly authorized by Congress. And if they have, then agencies have the authority to do that. And if they have not, then under the Supreme Court's decision, they do not. And ensuring compliance with that Supreme Court decision is part and parcel of ensuring compliance with legality with all kinds of other questions that might come up in the context of OIRA review. It would be my job, if confirmed, to ensure that was the case.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Langford. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the nominees for being here. Congratulations on your nominations. Mr. Revez, if I could start with you, I want to come back to President Biden's memorandum issuing priorities for OIRA back from January 20th, 2021. Those included addressing, I'm quoting now, systemic racial inequality and the undeniable reality and accelerating threat of climate change. I want to start with that second one first, if I could. You've dedicated a substantial part of your career to working on environmental issues. You've written, I think, a series of books and articles, other publications on environmental matters, including environmental law and policy, struggling for air, power plants, and the war on coal, environmental law and policy, second edition, the globalization of cost-benefit analysis in environmental policy, air pollution and environmental justice, the social cost of greenhouse gases, and destabilizing environmental regulation, the Trump administration's concerted attack on regulatory analysis. So I think it's fair to say this is a deep interest of yours. Is that fair?
It is, Senator.
And you were also, I think, the faculty director for a time, for a number of years actually, for the program on environmental regulation. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, it actually became the Institute for Policy Integrity, but I have led those programs for a long time.
Yeah, no, very good. So I want to ask you about one of the most significant environmental rules of the last decade, which is the Obama-era Waters of the United States rule. I'm sure you're familiar with that rule.
I'm familiar with the rule, Senator.
Tell me what your view on it is. Did you agree with the rule at the time that it was issued in 2015?
So I have actually not done as much work on water as I have done on air, but based on my, I wouldn't say I have deep expertise on on issues surrounding that rule, but in general, I agree that waters of the United States definition needed to be clarified, and I thought that the Obama administration had done a good job attempting to clarify it.
So you think that EPA had the authority, the legal authority, to expand the definition of waters of the United States in the way they did in the rule?
At the time, Senator, I thought they did. There have been intervening judicial decisions, and we may be in a different place. But at the time that regulation was promulgated, I thought the Obama administration had that authority.
You say that there have been intervening decisions, and now we're maybe in a different place. Explain that to me. What do you think?
Well, I have not followed those decisions closely, Senator, and so I can't give you a full answer. But I know that the courts have been issuing decisions in this area, and if I was in the OIRA position when a proposal involving a revision of that regulation came before me, I would seek to get up to speed on where things stand.
As it's likely to do, correct?
Well, I don't know what the timing is, and I don't know whether I'll get confirmed for this position.
Well, I'm sure you do know that the administration has proposed a substantial revision and extension of the Waters of the United States rule. The comment period on it, I think, is closed, and so if you are confirmed, you're likely to see it for OIRA review. I guess my next question would be, will you weigh carefully the interest in having a safe and reliable food supply in the United States, the livelihood of farmers and ranchers who depend on access to their land, use of the waters in their land? Will that weigh in your cost-benefit analysis?
It definitely will. I mean, from my perspective, again, as I indicated, I don't think there is, there shouldn't be the cost-benefit analysis of this administration or that administration. This is an academic discipline, is a professional discipline with professional norms, and all effects, whoever bears those consequences, and whether they're positive or negative, all that has to be accounted for, and a properly conducted cost-benefit analysis would do that, Senator.
But just to come back to my first question and to the main issue, it's your legal opinion as an expert on environmental law that the EPA did have the authority, at least in 2015, to define transitory bodies of water, like ditches filled with rain, as waters of the United States under Supreme Court precedent?
It was my view then, Senator, and I have not rethought this issue since then, and I'm not completely up to speed with all the intervening decisions.
Well, I have to say I find that disturbing. I mean, as the Attorney General of Missouri, I was one of the states that sued the Obama administration and then continued that suit into the Trump administration in order to get that rule repealed, precisely because my review of the case law is, and I think that subsequent courts have agreed, that the EPA was substantially outside of its jurisdiction in expanding the definition in that manner. And I have to tell you that the real-world effect on farmers and ranchers in the state of Missouri is little short of catastrophic, which is why you saw so many groups of farmers and ranchers, and I might just add, particularly small farmers and ranchers. Corporate interests are one thing. They can absorb the cost of these regulations. But when we're talking about family farms and family ranchers, the cost of complying with these draconian regulations that, frankly, I think are unauthorized by law or case law, statutory law or case law, is truly, I mean, it's crushing, truly, truly crushing. So I have to say that worries me, and this will be something that you'll be looking at. Let me ask you about another set of interests. The Biden executive order talked about accelerating climate change and racial inequality. Do you think cost-benefit analysis should also consider harms like religious liberties?
Yes, Senator. I think cost-benefit analysis should consider impacts on any individuals who feel an impact. And actually, for example, the Obama Executive Order 13563 talks about human dignity as one of the factors that should be considered. And I consider religious liberty to be part and parcel of human dignity.
Good. So let me just ask you, how would you evaluate the costs and benefits of a regulation like OSHA's vaccine mandate that was for employers that was struck down by the court in the NFIB case earlier this year? Did you support that rule at the time, the OSHA rule at the time it was issued?
I did not do any professional work on that rule. So
Did you have a professional opinion on it?
I did not have I just, I try to stay in my lane. I express views when I have studied things, and I have not studied that issue.
Well, let me ask you then to walk through how you'd evaluate the cost and benefits of a regulation like that one, where you have very significant religious liberty concerns on one side of the ledger. Give us a sense of your thinking.
Right. So I think those are cognizable consequences that should be evaluated. Now, as you know, not every cognizable consequence can be quantified and monetized because the techniques for doing that are not there. Unquantified benefits should be taken into account in a well-conducted cost-benefit analysis, and actually the executive orders and OMB Circular A4 provide for that and say that should happen. Exactly how they get weighed against quantified consequences is difficult, and there's no cookbook approach to doing that. But that's what makes it an important and challenging endeavor. And I would try to do this as well as could be done, taking advantage of any economic and other work, thinking through these issues. And at the end of the day, qualitative judgments need to be made, as they need to be made with respect to other unquantified benefits as well.
Well, my time has expired, and I know that there are other senators who are waiting to question, so I'll have some more questions probably for the record and for you as well, Mr. Shriver. I would just say, Mr. Revez, in your case, I think we have seen in the first 2 years of this, not quite 2 years of this administration, some truly outrageous and outlandish regulations that have not survived court review. And the OSHA mandate is one of them, but there are others. I would hope, if you're confirmed, that you would be a check on these, frankly, sometimes illegal and unconstitutional actions, and that you would commit to this committee that you will be. I'm glad to hear you say you think it ought to be nonpartisan, this sort of review. And I hope that you would be a nonpartisan and neutral check. And given your long background in the law, your very distinguished record in the law, I hope that you would be someone who would stand for the rule of law against what I think, frankly, have been some outrageous actions by this administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Sinema, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our nominees for joining us. This is not an easy process, and I appreciate your willingness to serve. Mr. Revez, when I hear from Arizonans and Arizona business owners, they're concerned with complex and burdensome rules coming out of Washington. Hardworking Arizonans want to comply with sensible rules, but regulatory agencies don't do a good job of looking back and making sure that the rules in place are achieving their goals and limiting impact on businesses. My SMART Act makes sure that agencies commit to reviewing their most extensive regulations when they're initially published by requiring that each major rule include a review plan. This plan will include methodologies for the review and a proposed timeline. If confirmed, will you commit to working with me to pass this legislation? And more generally, will you comment on the institutionalization of retrospective review in our regulatory process?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I would definitely commit to working with you on this important issue. I strongly favor evidence-based decision-making. It's critical that the benefits of regulation justify the costs. Now, under the Executive Order 12866 framework, that analysis is generally prospective, but Executive Order 13563 does contemplate a retrospective review. And I think it is important to learn wherever we can about the impacts of regulation. We do it at the front end in deciding whether regulation should be promulgated, but it should be done not only at the front end, and I agree with the sentiment that you expressed, that retrospective review is important. I also agree that it's good to be able to have a data gathering plan adopted that would make retrospective review possible. And so if confirmed, I really look forward to working, consulting with you, our team, and working with you and your staff on how to make retrospective review a real part of the regulatory process.
Thank you. Now, while guidance documents do not have the power to bind, they do have the power to significantly influence the behavior of private parties. Understanding this influential nature, what do you believe is the proper treatment of guidance documents by OIRA? And specifically, what flexibility should agencies have in the publication of guidance? And should these documents be subject to centralized review? And then finally, what standards do you believe should apply to such a review?
Thank you, Senator. I think guidance documents are a very important part of the regulatory process, and they should comply with transparency and public participation norms. They should be public. They should be public in a user-friendly way. Significant guidance documents currently undergo OIRA review, and I think that is appropriate. We're operating under an OMB memorandum dating back to 2007. So if confirmed, I would make sure that there is in place a guidance process that is transparent, that the American people have access to the information, that has opportunities for meaningful public participation, and has and undergoes OIRA review where the guidance is labeled to be economically significant. I think those are all important components of a well-functioning guidance process, and I would do whatever I could in this position to make sure that the guidance process is working as well as it can for the American people.
Thank you. You know, I'm a strong believer in the benefits of cost-benefit analysis as articulated in Executive Order 12866 and OMB Circular A4. Unfortunately, it seems that many individuals believe that this analysis is simply a code for deregulation and weakened federal engagement. So first, could you provide a brief overview of your understanding of the correct role of cost-benefit analysis in our rulemaking process? And second, what steps will you take, if confirmed, to highlight the positive outcomes associated with robust analysis and a strong, independent OIRA?
Thank you, Senator. In all of my work, I have stressed the importance that cost-benefit analysis should play in the regulatory process, except where prohibited by statute. And the reason is that regulations should evaluate all consequences, positive and negative, on the American people. I believe that properly conducted cost-benefit analysis should not have and does not have an anti-regulatory impact. I wrote a book about that, which doesn't mean that it has not from time to time been conducted in ways that had that impact. And I think the important thing is to make sure that all costs and benefits are considered in a fair and even-handed way. So, for example, at times when unquantified benefits were ignored, or when the indirect consequences of regulation were taken into account if they were negative but ignored if they were positive, well, if that happens, cost-benefit analysis will have an anti-regulatory effect. And I will make sure, if confirmed, that I will do everything I can to see cost-benefit analysis be carried out in an even-handed way, so it's neither a Democratic tool nor a Republican tool, neither a tool that favors a large amount of regulation or opposes regulation, so that it does an accurate, even-handed, fair weighing of the consequences of regulation. That's what I see it doing, and I see that as being extremely important.
Thank you. And for my last question, you know, as one of his first actions in office, President Biden issued his Modernizing Regulatory Review Memorandum. The memo included a request for recommendations concerning how OIRA can become more proactive in promoting and undertaking regulatory initiatives. So first, considering the limited size of OIRA, do you believe that it's feasible for desk officers to undertake the promotion of discretionary regulatory actions by agencies? And second, considering the need for an independent OIRA, will this unduly politicize the office?
Thank you, Senator. OIRA's role is primarily reactive and consists of reviewing regulatory impact analyses prepared by agencies. But since the promulgation of Executive Order 12866, OIRA has played somewhat of a proactive role with respect to the submissions by agencies of their unified regulatory agendas. And when John Graham was the OIRA administrator in the Bush administration, he instituted the practice of issuing prompt letters. And one such letter resulted in a requirement that certain large buildings have defibrillators, which is a requirement that has led to the saving of a large number of lives of people who would have died from heart attacks. So a proactive role is not completely foreign to OIRA, and President Biden asked OIRA to consider whether what proactive role might be desirable. If confirmed, I would work on how best to implement the presidential directive. I don't think that a proactive role will politicize OIRA, because OIRA's intervention will be limited to what OIRA does under Executive Order 12866, which is just to ensure that the benefits of regulation justify their costs. So when Administrator Graham in the Bush administration issued the prompt letter that led to defibrillators, he did that because he understood from his background as a public health expert that there were large benefits that would come from this requirement that were being left on the table because agencies hadn't moved to do that.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I have a question for Mr. Shriver, and I'll submit it for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sinema. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chair Peters, Ranking Member Langford, and thank you both for your willingness to serve these important roles. I'm going to move a little bit over to the talking about IT modernization in OPM. And so, Mr. Shriver, I really thank you for being here today. I'd like to talk about GAO's high-risk report. It comes out every 2 years and identifies areas in the federal government at high risk for fraud, waste, or mismanagement. The last report made a number of recommendations for addressing these high-risk areas, and OPM, of course, has a large role to play in addressing them. Specifically, in the area of IT modernization and workforce training, one of the report's recommendations for improving the federal government's management of tens of billions of dollars of IT investments was establishing key IT workforce planning processes. So, Mr. Shriver, if confirmed, what are your plans to work with individual federal agencies to ensure that they have these workforce planning processes in place? And how, in your new capacity, will you work to recruit and retain specifically cybersecurity staff?
Thank you very much for your question, Senator. And I think certainly the IT modernization issues that you've raised have been priorities at OPM and will continue to be priorities for us. And if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed as Deputy Director, it's an area that I would be happy to play an active role. I'm currently in my day-to-day role as the Associate Director for Employee Services. I'm not as involved in that. I can say that I think with respect to the GAO high-risk list and recommendations overall, our strategy at OPM has been to embed those into our strategic plan. We have a new OPM strategic plan that we released earlier this year, and that plan is informed by the recommendations from GAO, including on IT. We have metrics that we're using to measure progress. We have regular leadership level meetings to talk strategically about implementation of that plan and those recommendations. And so I would continue to play a role, and as Deputy Director would actively engage on the IT issues. With respect to cyber talent, we have major challenges in the federal government, and there are some good practices that have begun. I was happy to work with the Department of Homeland Security on deployment of its cyber talent management system, which has some interesting innovations when it comes to hiring and compensation and the way that cyber talent is deployed across DHS. I think there are a lot of lessons to learn there, and I would welcome the opportunity to work with you and this committee on how we might develop a government-wide cyber talent strategy that puts the rest of the agencies on more of a level playing field with DHS and DOD, who also has its own authority.
Well, I'd very much like to work on that because we do need to do IT modernization across the whole government, and we have a skills gap issue. And so GAO's most recent high-risk report also identified strategic human capital management as a high-risk area. It's downgrading the federal government's progress rating in this area from its 2019 report. So in doing so, it cited that what was at the time in 2021, the lack of a Senate-confirmed leadership at OPM for 18 of the prior 24 months, it really led to a mission-critical skills gap across the federal workforce. We know this in every area. Thankfully, OPM now is a confirmed director in place, but as deputy, you will still have a key role to play in addressing, again, the skills gap required to do this modernization still persists. So the training, the skills gap, how do you think you can address it? What can we do here to help you address it as you think about your new role?
Thank you for your question, Senator, and thank you for acknowledging that the lack of consistent leadership in the past at OPM has been a major contributing factor in that area. And so under Director Ahuja's leadership, and if I were to be confirmed as deputy, we would be certainly prioritizing and excited about making progress in this area. We've been doing a lot of work on the skills gap at OPM. One of the things that I think is important, Senator, is actually hiring people based on skills instead of proxy for skills. Many agencies historically have been hiring folks maybe because they have a college degree or because they rank themselves as on self-assessment questionnaires. We have been implementing a new skills-based hiring initiative that where we work with agencies to really define what the qualifications are that are needed for the jobs and then how they can assess candidates based on the actual skills that they have. One of the techniques that has been successful in some pilot projects is actually engaging subject matter experts in the hiring process. So the subject matter experts know what to look for on a resume, they know what to listen for in an interview, and they know what to look for in a writing sample. That's critical. I think in addition to looking to hire people based on skills, we certainly need to work on our career development, on our training opportunities, work on upskilling. I know OPM has had some successful upskilling pilots in the past around cybersecurity, around the IRS, and I think that we have an opportunity to build on those efforts and help align workers' existing skills to new jobs and make sure that we provide the training they need to be successful.
Yeah, I particularly like the upskilling. I think that really helps. You have employees that are already there, helps move them around, someplace you're already familiar with. Of course, the proxy for skills, that's really great because people do have a lot of skills they bring to the table, and it's important for us to identify them. Just in the few seconds I have left, I know Senator Sinema was talking about science-based rulemaking, and so Mr. Revez, in the prior administration, many rulemakings were heavily influenced by politics rather than science or legal principles, and it is crucial that all federal agencies, including the EPA, Department of Interior, Department of Energy, use the best science available in order to protect public health and, of course, the environment. And so I know you spoke a little bit for Senator Sinema's question, but you talk about your analysis and how you're going to do it and how you're going to keep it free of politics. Is there anything else that you'd like to let us know about how you want to work on those things and make sure that we have the best rulemaking for the agency, for the people, and our and the environment as well?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As I mentioned, I think it's just important that in the analysis, all of the consequences be taken into account. And I wrote a book about some of the analytical failings in the analysis done by the prior administration, and actually the courts ended up striking down a number of those rules based on the poor quality of the analysis. So, for example, one mistake was to essentially equate unquantified benefits as non-existent just because the techniques for quantifying them had not been developed, as opposed to trying to figure out in a qualitative way how to take them into account. There were also regulations that essentially ignored the indirect consequence of regulation if they were positive, but took them into account if they were negative. That is putting a thumb against regulation. All of those are erroneous techniques, are not consistent with the methodology and with professional understandings. And if confirmed, I will make sure that the best professional understandings of how to do this work were followed by OIRA.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. I'll be shortly recognizing Senator Padilla, but I'm going to need to step out to another hearing, and Senator Carper will take the gavel in my absence. But Senator Padilla, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Revez, pleasure spending some time with you in my office earlier in this week. My first question is for you. One of OIRA's most significant functions is its centralized review of, quote, significant federal regulations, which impact millions of Americans. Similar to elections and election administration, I believe our democracy works better when there's greater public engagement from all groups and a broad range of relevant stakeholders that can contribute to, in this case, government processes, not just turning out and voting. I believe this should also apply to the regulatory process. So what populations do you think are currently underserved by the way the regulatory process is functioning? I know you've done some research in this area in the past.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think it's very important that in addition to having aggregate estimates of costs and benefits, we understand how regulations affect subsections of the American people. It could be farmers, it could be business owners, it could be workers, it could be people with asthma or other respiratory illnesses, because not everyone is affected by pollution or by other consequences in the same way. And it's very important to understand that. I don't think the regulatory process has done a particularly good job at disaggregating this information. And I think for a while that was because the techniques for doing that were not available. I think they've improved significantly since then. President Biden has called for this work to be done as part of his modernizing memorandum. I've written about some very simple improvements that could be done in the regulatory process, which is, for example, to look at the distributional consequences of different alternatives to a particular proposed rule and not only to the rule that's actually proposed. And we look at alternatives to determine, in connection with the determination of aggregate costs and benefits, but we have traditionally not looked at alternatives to determine distribution. As a result, we can't make the best decisions that could be made. I would, if confirmed, I would very much want to work with the agencies and with the OIRA staff and get advice from members of this committee on how best to make sure that we have the most sophisticated understanding of the disparate impact of both the adverse consequences that regulations seek to address and of the regulations themselves on different groups of American people.
Well, I appreciate your thoughtfulness on this and already coming forward with some suggestions or recommendations on how to improve the process and, frankly, make it more equitable as a result. I know some of my colleagues, Senator Peters, Senator Sinema, and others have talked about the process for modernizing regulatory review, recommendations to revise Circular A4 specifically, so I won't be repetitive on those items, but did want to associate myself with their concerns, their questions, and their prioritization. In the time remaining, I'll turn to Mr. Shriver. And this is a little bit of a follow-up to questions from Senator Rosen on the topic of, she was specific to cybersecurity, sort of workforce concerns in general. And I want to weave in two items I've spoken, or I've asked questions of from your colleagues that have come through the committee for consideration before. Talk specifically about the need for STEM talent as we recruit, as we retain workforce, and diversity within that cohort. And yes, I'm proud to speak as a graduate from MIT with a mechanical engineering degree, trying to up the ranks of STEM talent on this side of the dais. In May, the Senate passed my resolution expressing the Senate's support for increasing the number of Latino students specifically and young professionals entering STEM fields, not just in the private sector, in the public sector as well, and at all levels of government. Latinos make up 17% of the overall workforce in the United States, but represent less than 8% of the workforce in STEM fields. The federal government is the nation's largest employer, with hundreds of thousands of STEM employees. So I'm interested in helping federal agencies fill the needed positions with qualified, diverse perspectives from various backgrounds. Mr. Shriver, would appreciate any thoughts you may have on how to build a more diverse STEM pipeline and workforce for the federal government.
Thank you, Senator Padilla, for your question. And I think you've put your finger on a critical issue for the federal government. We absolutely need to have diverse pools of talent, pipelines of talent into federal positions. We have been meeting with colleges and universities around the country, including HBCUs, MSIs, and what we're hearing from them is, number one, that they would like to see more recruiting from the federal government, but number two, only if that recruiting actually leads to real positions. And we have had a real drop-off in the number of interns that have been brought into the federal government. So one of the priorities that I've been working on in my current role under Director Ahuja's leadership is how can we reinvigorate our early career talent hiring. And there are multiple ways that we're working on that. We did implement some streamlined hiring authorities that had been enacted under the previous administration for post-secondary interns and college graduates. We are taking a fresh look at our Pathways program, which is the primary program that agencies use to hire interns and recent college graduates. And we are working on new guidance on paid internships. Under President Biden's executive order on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, he directed OPM and OMB to issue guidance to agencies on how to increase the number of paid internships and decrease agency reliance on unpaid internships, which of course are obstacles to participation in federal opportunities. So I look forward to OPM with OMB issuing that guidance later this year, and we will continue to engage with the communities to make sure that we're living up to what the law requires, which is the federal government should be recruiting from all segments of society.
Great. Thank you very much. Look forward to following up on both of these items with both of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Padilla, you are welcome. We just swap out. It's chairs here, just and one in, one out. So I just joined you from another hearing, and happy to be here at this one. Mr. Shriver, good to see you. And I heard Mr. Revez. Heard your name pronounced any number of ways. How do you pronounce it?
Revez, Senator.
That's great. That was my only question for you.
I hope I answered it well.
You were really good. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Thank you both for your willingness to serve in these two very important positions. Mr. Shriver, my understanding, I think that's our understanding, is OPM is rebuilding its staff and its operations after experiencing insufficient resourcing during the last administration. And what are some of the challenges ahead for OPM as it rebuilds its organization? And what are the opportunities? I like to say in adversity lies opportunity, but what are some of the opportunities, and how would you, if confirmed as Deputy Director, build on those opportunities to help OPM drive efforts to modernize the federal workforce policy across the federal government?
Thank you so much for the question, Senator Carper. It is both a challenging and an exciting time to be at OPM for the very reasons that you identified. In my current role as Associate Director for Employee Services, I've been leading the administration's government-wide federal workforce policy. And I've been doing it with a team that is not as staffed up as it had been previously, a team that lost a lot of subject matter expertise. And what we've been attempting to do while we rebuild that is also reestablish OPM as the federal government's strategic human capital leader. And it's been very exciting to work on the president's ambitious agenda for the federal workforce. We want these challenges, but there has been much work to be done. We've talked about several of the issues here today. that OPM has been working on and needs to continue to work on. It has been really important to prioritize and to work hard towards those priorities. It's been really important to think strategically and use our resources wisely because they are scarce. Now, I think the opportunity that's here is reimagining what OPM means as the strategic human capital leader. We worked very closely, for example, Senator, with the agencies that were receiving substantial funds under the bipartisan infrastructure law. We worked with them right when the law was passed to understand what their human capital needs would be. We brought together teams of people from across OPM to serve them. And I think what we saw were some successful early results on how an approach like that can bring efficiencies into the federal HR process. And we're going to take those lessons learned and build that out at OPM writ large. So that's just one example of where there was an opportunity to kind of transform the way that OPM is serving agencies.
Yeah. Proving once again that in adversity lies opportunity. Thank you, Albert Einstein. Mr. Shriver, in the past, when meeting with agency chief human capital officers about modernizing the federal workforce and hiring and retention practices, often we've heard from them that OPM was an obstacle rather than a partner in developing and implementing demonstration projects to improve hiring and retention. Do you believe that OPM should be a partner in these initiatives? And if so, if confirmed, how would you ensure that OPM is truly a partner to these federal agencies?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I absolutely believe that OPM should serve as a partner to agencies. Of course, we have an important compliance role that we play too, and that's critical. But I think I would build on my previous answer and say that we really are looking to reimagine how OPM can be a strategic partner to agencies and help them address the human capital challenges that they're facing day in and day out. It was really wonderful that the Chief Human Capital Officer Council was returned to OPM at the beginning of the administration. We've been working hard to build our relationships with the so-called CHICOs day in and day out. We have not only regular meetings with all of the Chief Human Capital Officers, we've instituted a number of different engagements, including personnel policy office hours, where we bring our subject matter experts to the meeting to answer questions that CHICOs are having. We have been engaging prior to issuing regulations and new policy with the Chief Human Capital Officers to ensure that their views as critical stakeholders are encompassed. We have encouraged them to make robust use of the OIRA process for interagency review of regulations so that we can get all of their perspectives. And again, like we did with the infrastructure implementation, we are looking for how we can engage early with them as strategic partners to bring human capital to the top of the list when it comes to implementing these major programs.
Good. Thank you. One question for Mr. Revez, and then I think we're going to have to break off. Mr. Revez, on January 20th last year, President Biden signed a presidential memorandum to modernize regulatory review, as you may recall. If confirmed as administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Administration, OIRA, that's one of my favorite acronyms. I'm not a big acronym fan, but I love that one. But it will fall to you to lead the agency in implementing this memorandum. What is your approach in striking a balance between social, environmental, economic, and public health consideration when reviewing regulations?
Thank you, Senator. I think the implementation of the memorandum is enormously important. The President gave a clear direction, and if confirmed, I look forward to working with the OIRA team to do that. One important component of the memorandum is bringing OMB Circular A4 up to the President. It's a very good guidance document. It's 20 years old. We need to make sure that all relevant benefits of regulation are taken into account. If they can be quantified, that they're quantified. Same on the cost side. and that we better understand how regulations affect different groups of Americans in different ways, and that regulatory process will work better if we have that understanding. We already do it, for example, under statutes for small businesses and the Regulatory Flexibility Act and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Act. And the president asked that this work to be done more broadly, and if confirmed, I very much look forward to implementing the president's directive so that regulations can work better, not just for the American people in general, but for individual groups of the American people.
Thank you for that response. I think I'm going to just hold it right here. Senator Langford is going to be joining us. He has asked that we hold and wait so he can ask some questions as well. He's very mindful of these issues and very knowledgeable about the issues that we're talking about. And I know he very much wants to be part of the dialogue. So, well, in the 30 seconds till he gets here, do any of you have in the audience a family member? Mr. Shriver, do you?
Yes, Senator. I have my wife.
Would your wife raise her hand? What's her name?
Her name's Joanne Martinez.
Joanne. I've been noticed as you were speaking, her eyes were rolling. I said, that usually happens with my wife and me, so it's a trait I admire in women. Anybody else besides your wife?
I have 2 of my 3 children. My other's off at school.
James is here. Sons and daughters, raise your hands, please. The Shrivers.
Mitch and Justine.
All right, good. Good to see you guys. Thanks for sharing your husband and your dad with all of us. All right, James, my friend, happy to pass the gavel to you.
Senator Carper, thank you for vamping for me. I appreciate that very much. I never have to worry if you're going to run out of words.
We make it up as we go along.
I got it. So, Bill, thanks again for the conversation. Let me ask some additional questions. Ms. Shriver, we didn't get a chance to be able to talk in the last round of questioning, so I want to walk through several things back with you. Thanks again for the long conversation that we had to be able to walk through a lot of issues in greater depth, and we'll have the opportunity to be able to do here. There's a challenge in some of our agencies on the federal workforce getting back to the office post-COVID. Some of them have been very effective at that. Some of them are continuing to be able to work through what's going to be telework, what's going to be remote work, what's going to be in-office work. But there's some in-office work that's still not actually in office, and it's slowing down, and we have a backlog in multiple different agencies right now, noticeably the IRS, State Department and passport work. We've got a lot of issues and backlogs in multiple of our entities in Social Security that have face-to-face needs to be able to connect with folks. How do we get folks back to work so we can catch up with the backlog? Most of corporate America, most private businesses around the country are open again and engaged. How do we get the federal workforce back in?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I think I want to first start by acknowledging that during the pandemic, fully half of the federal government continued to show up in the workplace day in and day out to do the work of the American people. And we owe them a debt of gratitude for that. And you're right that for the rest, there was a different footing. There was, in many places, a maximum telework footing. And there was a process that the administration ran around reentry, and that process was laid out in a memorandum M2125 that OMB, OPM, and GSA issued together. And the thing I want to highlight from that is that these decisions need to be made with delivery of the mission in mind. Productivity, delivery of the mission, those need to be paramount. So agencies conducted their reentry back. Most of them got done in April, and a few took a little bit longer, but that reentry has occurred. And now we're in that process of evaluating, now that we've reentered, how are these new hybrid work arrangements working? What is the impact on productivity? What is the impact on mission delivery? And it's important that agencies continue to make that assessment. I think the one last thing I would say, Senator, though, is that I think if an agency were to just go back to the way things were prior to the pandemic in February of 2020, I think that they would lose a lot of talent to other sectors. So this needs to be done strategically, but I think we can all agree we need to put productivity and mission delivery first.
We do. Actually, strategically doesn't mean delay. it can be intentional. And that's been the challenge that a lot of my constituents have in Oklahoma that'll contact me and say, hey, I can't get a hold of somebody face-to-face in Social Security, or I can't get my passport done, or I can't get access to IRS, or I can't. It's always there was a person there, I've got to meet with a person, I've got to be able to answer it, and they're not there. And they're confused because their bank is open, the restaurants are open, their business is open, everybody else is open, and they're saying, well, we're still trying to be able to work through the process of coming back in. I think that's the issue that really infuriates Oklahomans, is to say, we're all open, and suddenly okay, we're different than you, we're not open yet, but it's also behind. So getting the mission done is incredibly important, as well as protecting those individuals that are also in the workforce, because I have great respect for the federal employees as well, and to continue to be able to protect them as we do on everybody else. You and I had a good conversation yesterday about the world's largest pilot program for telework that just happened with COVID. It's interesting to me, the federal studies that were done in agencies just a few years ago said about 19% of their employees could go telework. And then COVID happens, and in some agencies we had 80% plus that were in telework posture on it, and everybody kind of figured out how to be able to make this work. Now, post-COVID, we got people back in the workforce, but we've also learned that we can do things telework and we can do things remote work. So my question to you is, in remote work, that is an individual that is not living around the headquarters, is not expected to be sometimes in the office and sometimes working somewhere else, that's not expected to be in the office, a true remote work individual. What are your thoughts and opinions about expanding the highly qualified pool of workforce around the country to be remote work individuals, and those individuals that may be spouses of our military, that work in very remote military installations, that have a very difficult time having a career, they may be able to get a job on the different base or posts, but they can't really build a career anywhere because they move every 2 to 3 years with their spouse, giving them the opportunity to build a career in the federal family based on doing remote work wherever they may be.
Ranking Member Langford, thank you for the question, and I enjoy talking to you about this topic because I think it's really a game changer for the federal government. I think that agencies are experimenting right now with some remote work pilots. There was a little bit of remote work that happened prior to the pandemic. I think they're experimenting with where maybe we can think more broadly about it. One of the things that's exciting about remote work is it opens the possibility of federal employment to communities all throughout the country, where previously those opportunities were only available if people moved, sometimes into a different state, many hundreds of miles. Remote work makes that a new possibility for those communities. I especially appreciate your connection to military spouses. You know, we have special authorities in the federal government that allow for a streamlined hiring process for military spouses. And I think that's sound public policy and something to build on. They're rather underutilized, and I think that if we were able to pair those hiring authorities with remote work opportunities where, exactly as you say, military spouses could stay in their same job no matter where their spouse might be deployed, I think that that would be a good thing for the civil service, a good thing for the folks that serve our country in the military, and a good thing for those spouses, because I know they have a lot to add to what we do day in and day out.
Yeah. So thanks for mentioning the hiring authorities on it. We have about 120 hiring authorities, but every agency still calls me and says, I want direct hiring authority. I don't like any of the 120 that are out there as possibilities, and the vast majority of the 120 aren't ever used. They're niche, different hiring authorities that are out there. But the whole structure of how we do hiring, 100 days to hire, the process, you mentioned in some of your written documents in advance, you want to speed up the hiring process and make that a more efficient process. What are your ideas for that?
Thank you for the question, Ranking Member, and we certainly do lose out on good candidates for federal jobs because of the length of time it takes. So this is something that we must address. I think one of the top new tools that we've been working on with agencies is to move away from just the old model of one job announcement, one job, let's go one at a time and hire people into the federal government, to more pooled hiring. And what I mean by pooled hiring is agencies have similar jobs, right? Like they're looking for people with similar skill sets. How can we do a pooled hiring action where we get a whole bunch of qualified candidates and multiple agencies can then hire from that. That would make a dramatic impact on the time to hire, because you would do all of this good work, recruiting and assessing candidates, and have this big pool of well-qualified folks that any agency could hire from. So I think that's important. I also think it's really important that we focus on the assessments that we're using to determine the skills of applicants, because I think too often what happens, if we don't do a good job of recruiting and assessing the talent, then the hiring manager's not happy with the candidates they get at the end of the day, and they may start the process all over again, which adds exponentially to the time to hire.
Right, and then you deal with the dynamics of people self-assessing their own skill level with that, and they're being taught, make sure you mark yourself at the highest level of all of them, or you're not going to get there. And you have people say, well, I still have areas to grow in this, and they'd be a very highly qualified candidate, but they just don't self-assess them as high as their actual skill level is. There was a story I heard when I was in Oklahoma several years ago in one of our federal facilities that we need to hire a forklift driver, and it took over 100 days to be able to hire someone to drive the forklift. They were having a real struggle with it because forklift drivers would go to other companies and they would get hired faster, and then by the time we got back to them in the federal entity, they've already worked at some of the place another 2 months and they're not going to quit. The other thing is they would say, well, I'm not going to rank myself the highest level as a forklift operator because I've only driven a forklift 3 years. I know a friend of mine that he's driven a forklift 20 years. He's a lot better than I am, so I'm not going to rank myself as high as him, though they're highly qualified. They've been doing it for 2.5, 3, 4, 5 years. Would definitely meet the standard of what we're actually looking for on it, but they have their own challenge with the whole assessment process. So we're very interested in this as a committee on what we can do to actually fix the hiring process, to be able to expedite this, to get more transitions from interns into positions, more highly qualified individuals within the pool nationwide, more individuals that will want to be able to engage in this process and to be a faster process to be able to work through it. So just know that this committee is very interested to be able to work with you to be able to accomplish that in the days ahead.
Thank you for your interest, Ranking Member. I would be happy to work with you in the committee on these issues.
Well, again, this shouldn't be a partisan issue. We should go get the best possible people to be able to serve their neighbors and their friends across the nation, serving in the federal family on this. Mr. Revez, I want to be able to follow up on a couple of things as well. I asked you yesterday a very difficult question. Independent agencies are independent of who? Because independent agencies often feel like they're independent of everyone, but I don't believe that that's actually so. And I'm not sure, based on your response yesterday, that you believe that's actually so as well. The challenge is getting OIRA's oversight to be able to help independent agencies to actually do the rulemaking process and the regulatory process for them to be able to make sure they're making good decisions. And again, we don't end up in years of litigation based on they just didn't have good accountability. How do we deal with the issue of independent agencies?
Thank you, Senator. As I indicated, I strongly believe that the benefits of significant regulation should justify their costs, and the regulations agencies should seek to maximize the net benefits of regulation as the executive order provides, except where statutes dictate otherwise. I have written about how the quality of analysis has been better in the executive branch and independent agencies, and I believe that OIRA's role in diffusing good practices throughout the executive branch accounts for these differences. There are ways in which OIRA could help analysis in independent agencies short of extending the executive order. A model for that is a memorandum of understanding between the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and OIRA following the passage of the Dodd-Frank legislation. On the specific question of extending the executive order, in 1981, the Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion stating that the president has the authority to extend the executive order to independent agencies. And the executive order already extends to independent agencies with respect to the requirement that they submit their unified regulatory agendas to OIRA for review every year. If confirmed, I would like to work with the OIRA team to ascertain ways in which OIRA can help improve analysis across the federal government, not just in the executive branch, but across independent agencies as well. And I look forward to working with you and members of your staff on that question. On the specific decision whether the president should extend the executive order to independent agencies, well, it's one for Congress and the president to make. I think presidents for the last 40 years have known that they have that authority, and for whatever reason, presidents for the last 40 years have not extended it with respect to this aspect of OIRA's work, even though they have extended with respect to other aspects of OIRA's work.
Okay. I look forward to that ongoing conversation. One final question for you on this, and it's dealing with some of the environmental review studies, modeling, and such that actually goes through cost-benefit analysis. Occasionally, the studies that are used for regulatory and the cost-benefit analysis are not made public. They're proprietary models is typically the conversation that's made, and so the American public has a new regulation imposed on them, but actually can't see the model of why this is actually a benefit or what the cost would be because the model is proprietary. The challenge is, if the regulation is going to be public, the reason the regulation should be there should also be public. How do we deal with these secret studies that are in the background to say, trust me, this warrants this, but you can't see it? How do we deal with that?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm a strong believer in transparency in the regulatory process, and scientific studies are often the building blocks for regulation because they're what tells us that, pollution is causing, this number of deaths or this number of illnesses or this number of lost work days and so on. And I believe that scientific studies should be public and the underlying information should be public. There is an issue about how to protect the individual identities of the subjects of scientific studies. I think, probably not, all of us would be a little worried about participating in studies if we thought that our sort of full health records for the rest of our lives would be available on public websites. And in days of large data, it is sometimes difficult to mask that information because there have been studies showing how this information can then be put back together and associated with individual people. So that's a challenge. I think the scientific community has norms about this, and in general, agencies do rely on peer-reviewed studies and should rely on peer-reviewed studies. And peer-reviewed studies have to meet the standards of scientific journals, which deal precisely with this issue. And it's an issue I care about and I'm interested in, and if confirmed, I would see how best we can promote the transparency norms that I hold so dear, while at the same time protecting the privacy interests of individuals who are subject to these studies.
Right. So the challenge of that is a peer-reviewed study is still a limited group of individuals to be able to see it, and you're still into the trust me, we've looked at it and it's okay model. We have to be able to have a way to be able to have models, systems, processes that if we're going to have transparency, we have full transparency. It's the joy of us as Americans. We love each other and we don't trust each other at the same time. And so we try to work through the process of saying if we're going to make this decision together, being we the people, then we need to be able to have the access to look at it, whether they actually look at it or not. When you tell somebody I can't see it, then immediately the suspicion is what's in it. And that's a fair question through our history to be able to ask. And it'll be one of those things that we've got to be able to work through.
I agree, Senator. And I think generally scientific journals have increased the requirements for making data public, and there's been a significant trend in that direction. And I think it's a salutary one.
Yeah, it's one we have to resolve. Gentlemen, thanks again. Thanks to your families for being here for a long day of questioning. All this will go on the record. There'll be additional questions that'll be coming for questions for the record, and we will get those to you. The nominees have filled out their responses to biographical and financial questionnaires, answered pre-hearing questions submitted by the committee, had their financial statements reviewed by the Office of Government Ethics. Without objection, this information being made a part of the hearing record with the exception of the financial data, which is on file and available for public inspection in the committee offices. The hearing record will remain open until noon tomorrow, September the 30th, the 29th, for the submission of statements and questions for the record. Again, thank you very much for the hearing today, and we look forward to the ongoing process. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Senator.